The leather satchel sat packed beside the narrow bed, waiting for a dawn that would finally deliver her from this God-forsaken town. Though Georgia Vance had not counted on meeting a man whose voice carried more weight than all her reasons for running combined. Skidoo, California in 1907 was little more than a mining camp clinging to the edge of the Panamint Range, where men came to tear silver from the mountains and leave their better natures buried in the dust. Georgia had arrived 6 months earlier with her Aunt Margaret, who died 3 weeks after they stepped off the stagecoach, leaving her niece alone with a failing boarding house and debts that multiplied like desert flies. She had fought to keep the place running, scrubbing floors until her knuckles bled, cooking meals for miners who paid when they remembered and cursed when they did not. But tonight she had made her decision. The boarding house could rot for all she cared. She had sewn her remaining money into the lining of her skirt, purchased passage on tomorrow's stage to Los Angeles, and promised herself she would never again let hope sink roots in barren ground. The evening air hung thick with August heat as she descended the boarding house stairs one final time to serve dinner. Dust motes danced in the amber light filtering through cheap curtains, and the smell of overcooked beef filled the cramped dining room where 6 men sat waiting. She recognized 5 of them, the usual lodgers who occupied her aunt's old rooms, but the 6th man was new. He sat at the far end of the table, hat removed to reveal dark hair that needed cutting, and eyes the color of strong coffee that tracked her movement across the room with unsettling attention. "That is the last of the roast," she announced, setting the platter down harder than necessary. "I trust you gentlemen can serve yourselves." "Now hold on there, Miss Vance," old Peter Grimshaw protested around a mouthful of potato. "What about tomorrow? We got a standing arrangement for breakfast at 6. Then I suggest you make other arrangements." Georgia turned back toward the kitchen, unwilling to endure their complaints. She had already wasted too many words explaining her departure to men who viewed her as little more than an inconvenience. "Miss Vance." The voice came from the new man, low and measured, with an accent that suggested Texas or perhaps New Mexico. "Might I have a word before you go?" She paused in the doorway, irritation prickling along her spine. "If you are looking for a refund on your room, sir, you will have to take that up with Mr. Henderson at the general store. He is buying the property and whatever obligations come with it. I am not looking for a refund." The man stood, unfolding to a height that made him duck slightly beneath the low ceiling beam. "My name is Quincy Irving. I run cattle down in Owens Valley, and I am in Skidoo looking to hire someone with experience managing provisions and accounts." "Then you have wasted your time." "I am leaving tomorrow." "So I gathered." He moved toward her with the careful gait of someone accustomed to horses and long distances. Up close, she could see the sun-weathered lines at the corners of his eyes, the white scar cutting through his left eyebrow, the capable hands of a working man. He was perhaps 30, maybe a year or 2 older. "Which is unfortunate, because Henderson tells me you are the most organized person in town, and I need organized more than I need anything else right now. Mr. Henderson is a gossip and a fool." "Maybe so." Quincy Irving's mouth curved slightly, not quite a smile but something warmer than the hard expressions she had grown used to seeing in Skidoo. "But he also showed me your ledgers. You kept this place running on almost nothing for half a year. That takes skill." Georgia felt her jaw tighten. She did not want compliments, especially not from a stranger whose timing could not have been worse. "I appreciate the offer, Mr. Irving, but my mind is made up. I am going to Los Angeles, where there are actual opportunities for women who can read and write." "Fair enough." He did not argue, which surprised her, Most men in her experience could not abide a woman who said no. But hear me out over coffee, at least. You are serving it anyway, and I promise not to waste more than 10 minutes of your time. She should have refused. Should have walked straight into that kitchen and ignored whatever proposition he intended to make. Instead, she found herself pouring 2 cups of bitter coffee and sitting across from Quincy Irving at the small table near the window, while the other boarders wolfed down their meal and paid them no mind. I run a ranch about 60 miles southwest of here, Quincy began, wrapping his large hands around the chipped mug. 300 head of cattle, 12 horses, and a crew of 6 men who are good with livestock but terrible with everything else. My foreman handles the day-to-day operations, but we have been losing money for 2 years because nobody can keep proper track of supplies, wages, or sales. I need someone to manage the books, order provisions, handle correspondence with buyers. Someone smart enough to see where the money goes and how to stop the bleeding. Why not hire someone local to you? I did. 3 times. First one could not read well enough. Second one ran off with 2 months of wages. Third one turned out to be wanted for fraud in Nevada. Quincy met her eyes directly, and she noticed how steady his gaze was, neither challenging nor evasive. Henderson said you were honest, said your aunt raised you right, and that you have been keeping her business afloat through sheer stubbornness. Those are qualities I value. And what would this position pay? Georgia asked, hating herself for even considering it, for letting curiosity override her carefully made plans. $40 a month, room and board, Sundays off. That is more than you will make in Los Angeles starting out, and the work is cleaner than most. He paused, then added, and the Owens Valley is not Skidoo. There is actual water there. Green things grow. You can see the Sierra Nevada on clear days, snow on the peaks even in summer. It is a better place to be than this. She wanted to argue, to tell him that Los Angeles had theaters and libraries and women who wore silk dresses instead of dust. But $40 a month was genuinely good money, more than she had made in her best month at the boarding house. And something in the way Quincy Irving spoke, with plain honesty and none of the oily persuasion she associated with men trying to get their way, made her believe he meant what he said. I will think about it, she heard herself say. That is all I ask. He finished his coffee in one long swallow and stood. I am staying here tonight and leaving at dawn. If you decide to come, there is room in my wagon for your things. If not, I wish you well in Los Angeles, Miss Vance. He left her sitting there as the other boarders began clearing out, heading to the saloon or their rooms, or wherever men went when they had nothing better to do. Georgia remained at the table, watching darkness gather in the streets beyond the window, feeling the careful architecture of her escape plan begin to crack. She did not sleep that night. Instead, she lay in the narrow bed, staring at the water-stained ceiling and trying to calculate which choice carried less risk. Los Angeles was a gamble, she knew that. She might find decent work, or she might end up in a sweatshop or worse, burning through her small savings while landlords and employers took advantage of a woman alone. The ranch job was more certain, but it meant trusting a stranger, riding 60 miles into the valley with a man she had known for less than 2 hours. It meant giving up her plan, the neat story she had constructed about starting fresh in the city. But there was something about Quincy Irving that lingered in her mind. The way he had listened when she spoke, the absence of presumption in his manner, the sense that he needed her skills genuinely, not as a pretext for something else. She had learned to read men carefully in the months since her aunt died, to spot the ones who looked at her with hunger or contempt or pity. Quincy had looked at her like she was a person who could solve a problem, nothing more or less than that. When the first gray light began filtering through the thin curtains, Georgia rose and dressed in her traveling clothes, a practical brown skirt and white shirtwaist that had seen better days. She stared at the packed satchel for a long moment, then picked it up and walked downstairs. Quincy Irving stood in the street beside a sturdy wagon hitched to two patient horses. He was checking the harness when she approached, and something in his posture straightened when he saw her. "I will take the job," Georgia said before she could reconsider. "But I want $50 a month, and I want it in writing." For the first time, Quincy smiled fully, and it transformed his weathered face into something unexpectedly handsome. "You drive a hard bargain, Miss Vance. That is why you are hiring me, is it not?" "I suppose it is." He extended his hand, and after a moment's hesitation she shook it, feeling the callous strength in his grip. $50 it is. Welcome to the Irving Ranch." He helped her into the wagon seat, then loaded her satchel into the back among supplies, grain sacks, and coils of rope. As the sun broke over the Panamint Range, painting Skidoo in shades of gold and amber that briefly made it look less miserable, they rolled out of town on the rough track that wound down toward the valley floor. The journey took 2 days, camping one night beside a spring where cottonwoods offered shade and the horses could drink their fill. Quincy proved to be a man of few words but comfortable silences, pointing out landmarks when they mattered and otherwise letting the landscape speak for itself. Georgia found herself relaxing by degrees, the permanent tension she had carried in Skidoo slowly unwinding as they descended into greener country, where cattle grazed and farms spread across irrigated fields. "Tell me about your crew," she said on the second morning as they followed a well-maintained road between pastures where fat cattle browsed. "What should I expect? 6 men, like I said. My foreman is named Thomas Reed, been with me 5 years, knows cattle better than anyone I have met. Then there is Samuel and James, they are brothers, handle most of the fence work and branding. Diego comes from Mexico, best bronc rider in the valley. Marcus and old William round out the group, general hands who do whatever needs doing." Quincy glanced at her, as if gauging her reaction. "They are good men, Miss Vance. They will treat you with respect or answer to me. I can handle myself, Mr. Irving. I do not doubt it, but it matters to me that people on my land behave decently. That is not negotiable." They reached the ranch in the late afternoon, when the sun hung low and golden over the Sierra Nevada, just as Quincy had promised. The ranch house was larger than Georgia had expected, a sprawling structure of wood and stone with a wide porch and real glass in the windows. Outbuildings dotted the property, a barn, bunkhouse, cookhouse, corrals where horses stood switching their tails at flies. It was more substantial than anything in Skidoo, more permanent, a place built to last rather than to exploit and abandon. A lean man with gray threading through his dark hair emerged from the barn as they pulled up. "Boss," he called, "was starting to wonder if you got lost. Just delayed, Thomas." Quincy jumped down from the wagon and offered Georgia his hand. "This is Miss Georgia Vance. She will be managing our accounts and supplies going forward. Miss Vance, this is Thomas Reed, my foreman." Thomas removed his hat and nodded respectfully. "Pleased to meet you, miss. Lord knows we need someone who can add and subtract around here." "I can do considerably more than that," Georgia replied, accepting Quincy's help down from the wagon seat. "But we can start with the basics." Quincy showed her to a small house set apart from the main buildings, a cottage really, with 2 rooms and a stone fireplace. "This was where my parents lived when they first homesteaded here," he explained, setting her satchel inside the clean, spare interior. "After they built the main house, we used it for storage, but I had the boys fix it up last week. There is a good lock on the door, and you have privacy here." Nobody will bother you. Where will you be? The question came out before she could stop it, and she felt her cheeks warm at the implication. Main house. Quincy pointed to the larger structure 50 yards away. I live there alone, except when Thomas comes up to go over plans. You are welcome to take meals in the cookhouse with everyone else, or I can have food brought to you if you prefer. The cookhouse will be fine. Georgia set her bag on the narrow bed and looked around the cottage, taking in the simple furniture, the whitewashed walls, the window that faced toward the mountains. It was more space than she had ever had to herself, and something tight in her chest loosened a fraction. When would you like me to start? Tomorrow is soon enough. Get yourself settled today. Quincy lingered in the doorway as if there was more he wanted to say, then simply touched his hat brim and left. Georgia spent the rest of the daylight hours unpacking her few possessions and exploring the immediate area around her cottage. The ranch bustled with activity, men moving between buildings on various errands, the sound of hammering from somewhere near the barn, cattle lowing in distant pastures. It was a working place, productive in a way that Skidoo had never been. She found herself cautiously approving. That evening she joined the crew for dinner in the cookhouse, a long building with tables and benches where the men gathered after work. They stared when she entered, then hastily made room and minded their manners as Quincy had promised they would. The cook, a portly man named Eugene who doubled as the general handyman, served beef stew and fresh bread that tasted like heaven after months of her own poor cooking. Miss Vance will be handling all the business affairs of the ranch, Quincy announced from the head of the table. That means if you need supplies, have concerns about wages, or anything else involving money, you talk to her. She has full authority to make decisions in that area. Even over Thomas? One of the younger men asked. The one Georgia guessed was Samuel from his resemblance to his brother. Even over Thomas, Quincy confirmed. I hired her because she is good with numbers and organization. I expect everyone to respect that. There were nods and murmurs of agreement, though Georgia caught a few skeptical glances. She did not mind. She would prove herself through work, as she always had. After dinner, Quincy took her to the small office attached to the main house, where chaos reigned in the form of stacked papers, disordered ledgers, and receipts stuffed into drawers with no apparent system. Georgia felt her fingers itch to organize it, to impose order on the mess. This is what I have been dealing with, Quincy said, gesturing helplessly at the disaster. Every time I try to sort it out, I lose half a day and end up more confused than when I started. When was the last time you reconciled your accounts? Honestly, maybe a year ago. Georgia suppressed a sigh and rolled up her sleeves. Then we have a great deal of work ahead of us, but we will get it sorted. That is what you hired me for. She spent the next week buried in papers, reconstructing financial records from fragmentary receipts and half-remembered transactions that Quincy and Thomas helped her piece together. It was tedious work, but Georgia discovered she enjoyed the puzzle of it, finding the patterns beneath the disorder. She also discovered that the ranch's financial troubles were not as dire as Quincy had feared. They were losing money through inefficiency and poor negotiation with buyers, not through any fundamental flaw in the operation. You have been selling your cattle too cheap, she told Quincy one evening, spreading her calculations across his kitchen table where they had fallen into the habit of reviewing the day's findings. The buyer in Bishop has been underpaying you by at least 15% compared to market rates in Independence. Quincy studied her figures, frowning. I have been working with him for 3 years. He always seemed fair. He seemed friendly, which is not the same thing. Georgia tapped the column of numbers with her pencil. I checked the published rates from the stockyards. You have been getting robbed, just slowly enough not to notice. What do you suggest? Find a new buyer, or better yet, diversify. Sell some cattle to Bishop at a better rate, some to Independence, maybe even ship some to Los Angeles if the rail costs make sense. She met his eyes across the table, expecting argument, but Quincy simply nodded. You are right. I let comfort override good business. He leaned back in his chair, studying her with an expression she could not quite read. Henderson was right about you. You are sharp. I am practical, Georgia corrected, though the compliment warmed her more than it should have. Someone has to be. They worked together most evenings after that. Quincy providing information about the ranch's operations while Georgia organized it into comprehensible records and projections. She found herself looking forward to those sessions, to the quiet focus of solving problems alongside someone who respected her judgment. Quincy had a quality of attention she had rarely encountered, a way of listening that made her feel heard rather than tolerated. He asked good questions, deferred to her expertise, and occasionally made dry observations that surprised her into laughter. You should do that more often, he said one night after she had laughed at his description of a particularly stubborn bull. Do what? Laugh. You look different when you laugh. Younger. Georgia felt suddenly self-conscious. I am only 24. I know, but you carry yourself like someone who has been tired for years. Quincy's voice was gentle, without pity. It is good to see you relaxing some. She did not know how to respond to that, so she returned her attention to the ledgers, though her concentration had scattered. The truth was, she did feel different here. The constant anxiety that had dogged her in Skidoo had faded, replaced by the satisfaction of meaningful work and the surprising comfort of Quincy's steady presence. She had not expected to like him, had not expected to like any of this, but somewhere in the past weeks, her resentment at abandoning her Los Angeles plans had transformed into cautious contentment. Summer deepened into early autumn, bringing cooler nights and the backbreaking work of preparing for Roundup. Georgia found herself drawn into aspects of ranch life she had not anticipated, helping coordinate supplies for the crew, managing correspondence with buyers now that Quincy had taken her advice about diversifying, even learning to ride well enough to inspect the outer pastures. That last skill came at Quincy's insistence. You cannot manage a ranch if you have never seen the whole operation, he told her one Sunday morning, leading a gentle mare named Bess from the barn. And you cannot see it on foot. I have never ridden a horse in my life, Georgia protested, eyeing the animal with misgiving. Then it is time you learned. I promise Bess is the most patient creature in the valley. He demonstrated how to mount, how to hold the reins, speaking in the same calm, patient tone she had heard him use with nervous horses. Trust her. She knows what she is doing even if you do not. It took her 3 Sundays to feel comfortable in the saddle, but by the 4th, she was riding beside Quincy out to the far pastures where the cattle grazed beneath the watchful presence of the Sierra Nevada. The mountains were stunning in autumn, snow already dusting the high peaks, and the valley spread below them in shades of gold and green. Georgia found herself understanding why Quincy loved this place, why he had put so much work into building something lasting here. My father homesteaded this land in 1875, Quincy told her as they rested the horses beside a creek. He brought my mother out from Missouri, and they lived in that cottage where you are now for 5 years while they built everything else. I was born in that cottage. Grew up helping with every aspect of the ranch. When they passed, 8 years ago, I inherited it all. That must have been hard, Georgia said softly. Losing them both. It was. They died within 6 months of each other, my father from a riding accident, my mother from pneumonia that winter. Quincy stared out across the pastures, his profile etched against the bright sky. I thought about selling everything then, moving somewhere easier, but this ranch was their dream and I could not let it go. So I kept working, kept trying to make it profitable enough to justify staying. And now it is my dream too. He turned to look at her, and something in his expression made her breath catch. Especially lately. They rode back to the ranch as the sun began its descent, painting everything in warm, amber light. Georgia's mind churned with thoughts she did not want to examine too closely. Feelings that had been building since she arrived, and had grown harder to ignore with each passing week. She had come here planning to stay only long enough to earn some money, to use this job as a stepping stone to something else. But the truth was, she no longer wanted to leave. She wanted to stay here, in this place where the work challenged her, and the mountains stood eternal, and Quincy Irving's presence had become the best part of her days. The realization terrified her. That night she lay in her cottage, listening to the sounds of the ranch settling into darkness, and forced herself to confront what she had been avoiding. She was falling in love with Quincy Irving. Perhaps had already fallen, past the point of easy retreat. It showed in how her heart lifted when she saw him in the mornings, how his rare smiles felt like treasures, how working beside him had become the activity she most anticipated. She did not know when it had happened, only that it had, quietly and inexorably, until the thought of leaving felt like tearing herself away from something essential. But she had no idea if he felt the same way. Quincy was unfailingly respectful, never overstepping the bounds of employer and employee. If he cared for her beyond appreciating her work, he gave no clear sign. Georgia had been fooled before by her own hopes, had learned the hard way that what she wanted and what was real did not always align. She would not make that mistake again. So she resolved to say nothing, to simply continue as they had been, doing her job well and guarding her heart as best she could. It was a reasonable plan, sensible and self-protective. It lasted exactly 4 more days. The crisis came on a Thursday, when a rider arrived from Independence with news that the buyer Quincy had contracted with for half their cattle had gone bankrupt. It was a financial disaster, the kind of blow that could cripple the ranch's entire year. Georgia spent the afternoon frantically calculating alternative options, while Quincy met with Thomas and the crew to discuss how to proceed. By evening, she had a possible solution, but it was risky. They could drive the cattle to the railhead themselves, arrange direct shipment to the Los Angeles stockyards, and negotiate with buyers there. It would take more time and effort, but the potential profit was significantly higher. The alternative was to sell locally at a loss and hope to recover over the next year. She found Quincy on the porch of the main house as darkness gathered, staring out toward the mountains with his shoulders tight with tension. "I think we can salvage this," Georgia said without preamble, climbing the steps to join him. "But you are not going to like how." She explained her plan, walking through the numbers and logistics while Quincy listened with focused attention. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "That means being away from the ranch for 2 weeks, maybe 3, he finally said. "Taking half the crew, leaving Thomas to manage everything here. I know. But the alternative is accepting a significant loss, and I do not think we can afford that, not if we want to stay solvent through winter." "You are right." Quincy scrubbed a hand over his face, exhaustion evident in every line of his body. "I hate that you are right, but you are. We will do it your way. I will start making arrangements tomorrow, Georgia." He turned to face her directly, and the use of her first name, which he had never done before, made her pulse skip. I do not know what I would do without you. You have turned this entire operation around in 3 months. You have given me hope that this place might actually succeed. You would have figured it out eventually, she said, though her voice came out softer than intended. You are smarter than you give yourself credit for. Maybe. But it would have taken years, and I probably would have lost everything first. He stepped closer, close enough that she could see the flecks of gold in his dark eyes, smell the faint scent of leather and sage that always clung to him. You saved this ranch, Georgia. You saved me from my own stubbornness and pride. That is not nothing. Her heart hammered against her ribs. Quincy, I know this is not appropriate, he continued, his voice low and urgent. I know I am your employer and I promised you would be safe here and I have no right to say any of this, but I have to be honest with you. These past months working with you, getting to know you, it has been the best time I have had since my parents died. Maybe the best time I have ever had. You challenge me. You make me think differently. You make me want to be better, to build something worth your effort and intelligence, and He stopped, seeming to struggle with the words, and Georgia found herself holding her breath. I care about you, Quincy finished simply. More than I should. More than is probably wise, but I cannot keep pretending I do not, so there it is. You deserve to know the truth. The night air hung heavy between them, filled with possibility and risk. Georgia's mind raced through 100 responses, 100 ways to protect herself or deflect or maintain the careful distance she had tried to preserve. But standing there in the darkness with Quincy's honest eyes on hers, she found she did not want distance anymore. She wanted what she had been denying herself since the day she arrived. I care about you too, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I have been trying not to, but I do. I think I have since you first spoke to me in Skidoo, when you looked at me like I was someone capable instead of someone to be dismissed. Nobody had looked at me that way in so long. Georgia. Her name on his lips sounded like a prayer. I do not want you to stay here because you feel obligated or because you think you owe me anything. If Los Angeles is still what you want, if you need to go, I will understand. But if there is any chance you might want to stay, to build something here with me. He paused, then added quietly, I would spend the rest of my life giving you reasons to choose that. She thought about the future she had imagined for herself, the one involving the city and anonymity and starting over with nothing but determination. It had seemed like freedom when she planned it in Skidoo's stifling confines. But standing here on this porch, with the valley spread out below them, and Quincy Irving offering her something infinitely more valuable than escape, she realized that version of freedom was just another kind of loneliness. I do not want to go to Los Angeles, Georgia said clearly. I want to stay here with you, if you truly mean what you are saying. I have never meant anything more. Quincy reached for her hand, his fingers warm and calloused as they closed around hers. I promise you, Georgia, I will do everything in my power to make you happy, to give you the life you deserve. I do not need promises, she said, stepping closer. I just need you to be honest with me, always. That is all I have ever wanted. Then I promise you honesty at least. That much I can guarantee. He leaned down slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted, but Georgia did not want to pull away. She wanted this, wanted him, with a certainty that felt like coming home after years of wandering. When his lips met hers, gentle and questioning, she answered by rising on her toes and kissing him back with all the emotion she had been holding in check for months. It was not a long kiss, or a particularly practiced one, but it was real. When they finally broke apart, both slightly breathless, Quincy rested his forehead against hers. I am probably doing this all wrong, he murmured. I should have courted you properly, brought you flowers, asked your permission instead of just blurting out my feelings. Georgia laughed softly. I think we have moved past the need for conventional courtship, and I hate to break it to you, but there are no flowers this time of year. Then I will bring you flowers in spring, whole armloads of them, every color I can find. I will hold you to that." They stood together on the porch for a long time, hands clasped, speaking in low voices about the future they might build together. Georgia felt lighter than she had in years, as if some heavy burden she had carried for too long had finally lifted. She had planned to leave at sunrise that morning in Skidoo, had been so certain that escape was the only answer. But Quincy had given her reasons to stay with every honest word, with every moment of respect and partnership, until staying had transformed from obligation into choice, and then into something deeper than she had names for. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of preparation and hard work. They assembled a crew to drive the cattle to the railhead, Thomas in charge since he knew the route and the process better than anyone. Quincy would go as well, to handle negotiations with the stockyard buyers. Georgia wanted to accompany them, to see the plan through to completion, but someone needed to stay and manage the ranch's other operations. "I trust you to keep this place running," Quincy told her the night before they left. "Thomas knows cattle, but you know everything else. You are the heart of this operation now, whether you realize it or not. Just come back safe," Georgia said, gripping his hands. "Do not take unnecessary risks. I will be careful. We will be back in 3 weeks at most." He kissed her again, longer this time, with the urgency of impending separation. "Think about what you want when I return, what kind of future you can see for us. Because I am going to ask you properly, Georgia. I am going to do this right." She knew what he meant, and her heart swelled with joy and terror in equal measure. "Then I will have an answer ready." The crew left at dawn, driving 150 head of cattle toward the railhead 70 miles southwest. Georgia threw herself into work to distract from worry, managing the reduced crew, handling correspondence, and working with Eugene to prepare for winter. The ranch felt emptier without Quincy's presence, and she had not realized how much she had come to depend on their evening conversations until they were gone. But she was not idle in his absence. She thought carefully about what he had implied, about what she wanted from a future together. Marriage was not something she had ever seriously contemplated, having watched too many women lose themselves in partnerships where their contributions went unvalued. But Quincy was different. He had proven over months that he respected her mind, valued her work, saw her as an equal partner rather than a subordinate. With him, she thought she could build something genuine. The crew returned on a Tuesday afternoon, dusty and exhausted but triumphant. They had sold the cattle for nearly double what the failed buyer had offered, enough to secure the ranch's finances through winter and into next spring. Thomas looked pleased as he dismounted, and the other men were already celebrating their success. But it was Quincy that Georgia's eyes sought, Quincy who dismounted and walked straight to her with such clear intent that even the crew noticed and began grinning. He was filthy from the trail, needed a shave, and had never looked more handsome to her. "We did it," he said simply. "Your plan worked perfectly. I told you it would." Georgia smiled, not caring that everyone was watching. "Welcome home. It is good to be home." He glanced around at the gathered men, then back at her. "Can we talk, privately?" She nodded, and they walked together toward her cottage, away from the knowing looks and barely suppressed laughter of the crew. Once inside, Quincy turned to face her, suddenly looking nervous in a way she had never seen him. "I have been thinking the entire ride back," he began, "about how to say this properly, what words to use that would be worthy of what I am asking. But the truth is, there are no perfect words. There is just what I feel and what I hope you might feel too. Quincy, let me finish, please." He took both her hands in his, holding them carefully. "Georgia Vance, you came to this ranch planning to stay only a season, but you have become the center of everything I am building here. Not just because you are brilliant with numbers and organization, though you are, but because you make me want to be better, to work harder, to create something worth your commitment. You challenge me and inspire me and make me laugh when I take myself too seriously. You are my partner in every way that matters, and I want to make that permanent. I want to marry you if you will have me. I want to build a life together, here on this land, with whatever children we might be blessed with, and I promise I will spend every day trying to deserve you." Georgia felt tears prick her eyes, the good kind, the kind that came from joy rather than pain. "Yes," she said clearly. "Yes, I will marry you, because you do challenge me and you respect me and you have shown me what partnership actually looks like. I love you, Quincy Irving. I think I have loved you since you looked at me in that dining room and saw someone capable instead of someone broken. So yes, 1,000 times yes." He kissed her then, deeply and thoroughly, and Georgia kissed him back with all the emotion flooding through her. When they finally broke apart, both were laughing and crying a little, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what they were promising each other. "I do not have a ring yet," Quincy said apologetically. "I should have bought one in Independence, but I wanted to ask you first, to know it was what you truly wanted." "We will get a ring together," Georgia replied. "I want to choose it with you. That feels right. Everything feels right with you." He held her close, and she rested her head against his chest, hearing the steady beat of his heart beneath the rough fabric of his shirt. "When should we marry? I do not want to wait long, but I know women usually want time to prepare." "Soon," Georgia said decisively. "I do not need a big ceremony or a fancy dress. I just need you and a future and this place that has become home. We can marry in Independence or here with the crew as witnesses. I truly do not care about the details." "Then we will marry in 3 weeks," Quincy decided. "That gives us time to ride to Independence for a license and whatever preparations you want. We can have the ceremony here, under the cottonwoods by the creek. Simple and honest like us. Perfect." They planned quickly after that, both too practical and too eager to wait longer than necessary. Quincy wrote to his brother in Sacramento to come stand up with him, and Georgia wished desperately that her aunt were still alive to witness her happiness. But she wrote instead to a cousin in San Francisco, who she hoped might make the journey. They rode together to Independence to file the necessary papers, and Georgia chose a simple gold band that fit perfectly on her finger. The 3 weeks passed in a flurry of preparation and work. Eugene insisted on cooking a proper feast after the ceremony, and the crew built benches beneath the cottonwoods and strung lanterns in the branches. Quincy's brother arrived 2 days before the wedding, a jovial man named Marcus, who immediately approved of Georgia and told embarrassing stories about Quincy's childhood that made her laugh until her sides hurt. Her cousin could not make the journey, but sent a letter of congratulations and a beautiful quilt she had made herself. Georgia read the letter alone in her cottage and cried a little, wishing she had more family to share this with, but knowing that she was building something new here, a chosen family that mattered just as much. The wedding day dawned clear and cool, the first day of November with winter whispering in the air. Georgia wore a simple cream-colored dress she had made herself, with lace at the collar and cuffs, and pinned her dark hair up with the few nice pins she owned. She felt beautiful not because of what she wore, but because of how Quincy looked at her when she emerged from the cottage. They stood together beneath the cottonwoods as a circuit preacher who served the valley spoke the traditional words. Thomas and Marcus stood beside Quincy, and Eugene and Diego stood beside Georgia since she had no family present. The rest of the crew gathered around, bearing witness to the promises being made. "Do you, Quincy Marcus Irving, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do you part?" "I do," Quincy said firmly, his eyes never leaving Georgia's face. "And do you, Georgia Rose Vance, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do you part?" "I do," Georgia replied, her voice strong and sure. They exchanged rings, simple gold bands that matched, and when the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Quincy kissed her with such tenderness that Georgia felt her heart might burst from happiness. The crew cheered, and someone produced a fiddle, and suddenly there was music and celebration as Eugene brought out the feast he had prepared. They danced as the sun set over the Sierra Nevada, casting the valley in shades of rose and gold. Georgia had never been much of a dancer, but Quincy led her patiently through the steps, and she found herself laughing and spinning in his arms while their friends celebrated around them. It was simple and joyful, and exactly what she wanted. That night, alone together finally in the main house that was now theirs jointly, Quincy carried her over the threshold with traditional ceremony. "Welcome home, Mrs. Irving," he said softly. "I have been home for months," Georgia replied, but she kissed him anyway, deeply and with promise. "But I like hearing you say it." They made love that night with the gentle awkwardness of two people learning each other for the first time, but also with the deep affection they had built over months of working together. Quincy was patient and careful, making sure she felt safe and cherished, and Georgia gave herself to him with complete trust. Afterward, lying tangled together in the big bed that had been his alone, she felt more content than she had ever imagined possible. "I love you," Quincy murmured into her hair. "I will tell you that every day for the rest of our lives." "Good," Georgia said sleepily, "because I love you too, more than I knew I could love anyone." The winter that followed was the happiest time Georgia had ever known. She and Quincy settled into married life with surprising ease, their existing partnership simply deepening into something more intimate and permanent. They worked together on the ranch accounts, made plans for expanding the herd in spring, discussed building an addition to the house if they were blessed with children. The crew treated Georgia with the same respect they always had, perhaps even more now that she was officially the boss's wife and partner. Snow came to the mountains and occasional rain swept the valley, turning everything green and lush. Georgia stood on the porch one evening in February, watching storm clouds gather over the Sierra Nevada, and reflected on how much had changed in 6 months. She had planned to leave Skidoo at sunrise, to run toward Los Angeles and an uncertain future. Instead, Quincy Irving had given her reasons to stay with every honest word, every moment of respect, every demonstration that he saw her as an equal worth cherishing. He had offered her partnership and love and a place to belong, and she had chosen it over solitary freedom. She had chosen so well. "What are you thinking about?" Quincy asked, emerging from the house to wrap a blanket around her shoulders. "Everything. How different my life is now compared to what I expected." She leaned back against him, feeling his warmth and solidity. "How grateful I am that you asked me to hear you out over coffee that night." "Best 10 minutes I ever spent," Quincy said, kissing the top of her head. "Though to be honest, I think I started falling in love with you the moment you demanded $50 a month instead of 40. "I knew right then I had met my match," Georgia laughed, "and you have been stuck with me ever since." "Stuck is not the word I would use. Blessed, maybe. Lucky, certainly." He turned her gently to face him, his expression serious. "I'm in it, Georgia. Marrying you was the best decision I ever made. You have made this ranch successful, but more than that, you have made me happy. I did not realize how lonely I was until you were here filling that space." "I was lonely too," she admitted. "For years, I think, even before my aunt died, but I am not lonely anymore." "Good. Because you are stuck with me now too, for better or worse. Remember?" "I remember. And it has been mostly better, so I think we are doing well." They stood together watching the storm roll in, comfortable in the silence that had always existed between them. When the first drops of rain began to fall, they went inside to the warm house, to the life they were building together, to the future that stretched before them full of possibility. Spring arrived with an explosion of wildflowers covering the valley floor, and Quincy made good on his promise to bring Georgia armloads of them. Lupines and poppies and desert marigolds filled every vase in the house, their colors bright against the simple furnishings. The ranch work intensified with calving season and the preparations for summer grazing, and Georgia found herself more involved than ever in the daily operations. In April, she realized she was pregnant. The discovery filled her with equal parts joy and terror, but Quincy's reaction was pure happiness. He became even more protective, trying to prevent her from doing any heavy work, until Georgia finally had to sit him down and explain that she was pregnant, not broken. "I am going to keep working," she told him firmly. "Obviously, I will be sensible, but I am not going to spend the next 6 months sitting idle. That is not who I am." I know." Quincy held up his hands in surrender. "I just want you to be safe, both of you. We will be safe. Women have been having babies since the beginning of time, and most of us survive just fine." She softened her tone. "But I appreciate that you care. Just trust me to know my own limits." He did trust her, as he always had, though she caught him watching her with concerned attention whenever she did anything more strenuous than paperwork. It was endearing, if occasionally exasperating. The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the summer months. Georgia continued managing the ranch accounts, though she delegated more of the physical tasks as her belly swelled. The crew took to bringing her things, fetching water and carrying supplies, treating her with a combination of respect and gentle amusement. She felt cared for in a way that warmed her heart, part of a community rather than alone against the world. In early October, as the leaves turned gold in the cottonwoods and the first cold winds blew down from the mountains, Georgia went into labor. Quincy rode frantically to fetch the midwife from the nearest ranch, a capable woman named Mrs. Henderson, who had delivered half the babies in the valley. The labor was long and difficult, lasting through the night and into the next afternoon, and there were moments when Georgia thought she might not survive it. But she did survive, and when Mrs. Henderson finally placed a squalling infant in her arms, Georgia looked down at her son and felt love crash over her like a wave. He was red-faced and wrinkled and absolutely perfect, with a shock of dark hair and strong lungs that announced his presence to the world. "A boy, Mrs. Henderson announced unnecessarily. Healthy and strong, just like his parents." Quincy stood beside the bed looking stunned, tears streaming openly down his face as he stared at his son. "Can I?" he asked, and Georgia carefully transferred the baby to his father's arms. "Hello there," Quincy said softly to the infant. "Welcome to the world, little one. You have made your mother and me the happiest people in California." They named him Thomas Quincy Irving after Quincy's father and the foreman who had become like family. Little Thomas was a good baby, eating well and sleeping in reasonable stretches, and Georgia marveled at how quickly she adapted to motherhood. Quincy was an involved father from the start, changing diapers without complaint and walking the floor with Thomas when he fussed, singing old cowboy songs in his rumbling voice until the baby quieted. "You are a natural at this," Georgia told him one night, watching him rock their son by lamplight. "I have had good teachers," Quincy replied. "My parents were wonderful with me and my brother. I want to be that kind of father, present and involved, not the kind who considers children solely their mother's responsibility." "Well, you are succeeding." She joined him, resting her head on his shoulder as they both gazed at their sleeping son. "He is lucky to have you. We both are." The years that followed were full and happy, marked by the rhythms of ranch life and the growth of their family. Thomas was 2 when Georgia gave birth to their daughter, whom they named Rose Margaret after her grandmother and great-aunt. Rose was calmer than her brother had been, a thoughtful baby who studied everything with serious gray eyes. The ranch continued to prosper under their joint management. Georgia's financial acumen and Quincy's knowledge of cattle proved to be an unbeatable combination, and they expanded steadily, buying adjacent land and increasing the herd. They hired more crew, built new outbuildings, and invested in improvements that made the operation more efficient. Thomas Reed eventually married a widow from Independence and built his own house on ranch land, becoming even more integrated into their extended family. The other crew members came and went over the years, but there was always a core group who stayed, drawn by fair wages and good treatment. Georgia made sure everyone was paid promptly and well, and Quincy maintained the respectful atmosphere he had promised her that first day. When Thomas was 5 and Rose was 3, Georgia gave birth to another son, whom they named Andrew. He was a wild child from the start, fearless and energetic, always climbing things and exploring. Quincy joked that Andrew would either become a famous adventurer or give them both gray hair before he turned 10. Their house expanded to accommodate the growing family, new rooms added as needed, always with an eye toward practicality rather than show. Georgia loved the organized chaos of family life, the noise and mess and constant activity that filled their home. It was so different from the lonely, anxious existence she had endured in Skidoo, or the uncertain future she had imagined in Los Angeles. This was real and solid and hers, built on partnership and love. On their 10th anniversary, Quincy took her back to the spot beneath the cottonwoods where they had married. The trees had grown, and so had they, marked by years of work and love and raising children together. "You have any regrets?" he asked, holding her close as the evening light painted the valley gold. "About staying here instead of going to Los Angeles. About choosing this life." "Not a single one," Georgia said honestly. "That morning in Skidoo, I thought running away was the only answer. I thought escape was the same as freedom. But you showed me something better. You gave me partnership and respect and love, all the things I did not know I needed until you offered them. You gave me reasons to stay with every word, every action, every day we have spent together. This life we have built, our children, this ranch, all of it is more than I ever dreamed of having. You saved me too, you know," Quincy said quietly. "I was so lost before you came, working myself to exhaustion but going nowhere, alone and not even realizing how much I needed someone. You transformed everything, Georgia, not just the ranch finances but my entire life. You made it worth living again. We saved each other then." She kissed him softly. "And we built something good together, something that will last." "Something that will last," he agreed. And they stood together beneath the cottonwoods as the sun set over the Sierra Nevada, just as they had on their wedding day a decade before. The children grew, as children do. Thomas showed an early aptitude for working with cattle, following his father and Thomas Reed around the ranch and absorbing everything they taught him. Rose loved books and learning, and Georgia made sure she received a proper education, hiring a teacher from Independence to come twice a week. Andrew remained wild and adventurous, the one who worried them most but also made them laugh hardest with his antics. When Thomas turned 16, Quincy gave him a section of land and 10 head of cattle to manage himself, teaching him the business from the ground up. Georgia worked with him on the accounts, showing him how to track expenses and income, how to negotiate fairly, how to plan for the future. She saw echoes of both her and Quincy in their eldest son, his father's love of the land combined with her practical intelligence. Rose proved to have her mother's gift for numbers and organization. At 13, she was helping Georgia manage the ranch ledgers, and by 15, she was handling most of the correspondence with buyers. She was also beautiful, with her father's dark eyes and her mother's fine features, and Georgia watched with mixed feelings as young men from neighboring ranches began finding excuses to visit. "She is too young for courting," Quincy grumbled one evening after a particularly obvious visit from a rancher's son. "She is 15, which is how old I was when I started receiving attention," Georgia replied. "But she is also smart enough to know what she wants. We raised her to think for herself. I know. I just do not like thinking about her leaving someday. She will not leave, not really. None of them will go far. This is their home just like it is ours." Georgia took his hand. "Besides, we are not getting rid of them quite yet. We have years before any of them are ready for marriage." She was right about that. The children grew into young adults slowly, each finding their place in the ranch operations or pursuing their own paths while remaining close. Thomas eventually married a girl from Independence, a rancher's daughter named Catherine, and built his own house on Irving land. They gave Georgia and Quincy their first grandchild, a boy named Quincy after his grandfather, and Georgia discovered that being a grandmother was even more wonderful than she had anticipated. Rose shocked everyone by deciding to attend a women's college in San Francisco, determined to get a formal business education. Georgia supported her completely, having always believed in the importance of education for women, though Quincy fretted about his daughter living so far away. Rose returned after 3 years with a degree and even sharper business skills, and immediately set about expanding the ranch's operations into new markets. Andrew, true to his adventurous nature, spent several years traveling before finally settling down. He returned to the valley at 23 with a wife he had met in Montana, a capable woman named Sarah who fit into the family as if she had always been there. They took over managing the northern section of the ranch, which had grown to encompass several thousand acres. Through it all, Georgia and Quincy remained partners in every sense, working side by side to manage the sprawling operation they had built together. The ranch employed 30 men at its peak, ran 3,000 head of cattle, and had become one of the most respected operations in the Owens Valley. But more important than the business success was the family they had raised, the community they had fostered, the life they had created together. On their 25th anniversary, the entire family gathered for a celebration at the main house. 3 children, 4 grandchildren so far, Thomas Reed and his wife, and several long-serving crew members who had become like family over the years. Eugene, now elderly but still cooking occasionally, had prepared a feast. There was music and dancing and storytelling that lasted long into the night. Georgia sat beside Quincy on the porch as the party continued inside, watching stars emerge in the clear desert sky. The Sierra Nevada rose dark against the west, eternal and unchanging, while everything around them had transformed. "You remember that night in Skidoo?" Quincy asked, his voice quiet beneath the sounds of celebration. When I asked you to hear me out over coffee. Every detail, Georgia replied. I remember thinking you were probably going to waste my time, but being too curious to refuse. I remember how you looked at me, like I was someone worth listening to. I remember feeling the first crack in my certainty about leaving. I knew the moment you sat down that I wanted you to stay, Quincy admitted. Not just for the ranch, though that was true too, but because something about you called to me. Your strength, your intelligence, the way you refused to be defeated despite everything you had been through. I wanted to know you. I wanted to be near you. I wanted to give you every reason I could think of to choose to stay. And you did. With every word, every action, every day since then. Georgia turned to face him, seeing the man she had fallen in love with still there beneath the silver threading through his dark hair, the deeper lines around his eyes. You gave me a life beyond anything I imagined that morning when I planned to leave. You gave me love and partnership and family. You gave me home. We gave each other home, Quincy corrected, taking her hand. That is what partnership means. Building something together that neither of us could have created alone. Then I would say we succeeded. Georgia smiled, gesturing toward the house full of family and friends, the ranch spread out beyond in the darkness, the mountains standing witness to everything they had built. Look at what we made, Quincy. Not just the ranch, but all of this. The family, the community, the legacy. It started with a conversation over bad coffee and became everything that matters. Best conversation I ever had, Quincy said, and kissed her the way he still did after 25 years of marriage, with tenderness and passion and deep, abiding love. They sat together on the porch late into the night, talking and laughing and remembering, surrounded by the sounds of their family and the vast quiet of the valley they had made their own. Georgia thought about the woman she had been in Skidoo, desperate and lonely, and planning her escape. She wished she could tell that woman not to be afraid, that the stranger who would offer her coffee and honest words was also offering her everything she had ever wanted without knowing it. That choosing to stay would be the best decision of her life. But perhaps that younger self had known, even then. Perhaps that was why she had said yes to coffee, why she had listened when Quincy Irving spoke about his ranch and his needs and his hope for something better. Perhaps some part of her had recognized what was being offered, not just a job but a future, not just security but love, not just survival but true partnership with someone who would value her completely. She had planned to leave at sunrise, but Quincy had given her one reason to stay with every word. And those words had built a life more beautiful than any sunrise could promise, a love more enduring than any escape could provide. She had chosen to stay, and in staying, had found everything she had been searching for all along. The years continued to pass, marked by the changing seasons and the steady rhythms of ranch life. Georgia and Quincy grew older together, their hair turning silver, their bodies marked by decades of hard work and good living. The ranch continued under the management of their children, though Georgia and Quincy remained involved, offering advice and wisdom gained from 40 years of partnership. They became the patriarch and matriarch of a small dynasty, the Irving Ranch known throughout California for its success, and the family that ran it. But for Georgia and Quincy, the real measure of their life together was not the land or the cattle or the money, though those things provided security and comfort. It was the love they had built and maintained, the family they had raised, the community they had fostered, the partnership they had honored through good times and hard times alike. When they were in their 60s, sitting together on the porch in the evening as had become their habit, Quincy turned to Georgia with the same expression she remembered from that first conversation in Skidoo. "I have been thinking," he said. "That is always dangerous," Georgia teased, but she took his hand. "I have been thinking about how lucky I was that day, that you were in Skidoo when I happened to be there, that Henderson told me about you, that you agreed to hear me out even though you had already decided to leave. 1,000 things could have gone differently and we might never have met. But we did meet," Georgia said softly, "and we chose each other every day since then. That was not luck, Quincy. That was us deciding what we wanted and working to build it together. You are right." He raised her hand to his lips, kissing it gently. "We built something good, did we not? We built something extraordinary. No regrets, not a single one," Georgia said, echoing her words from their anniversary years before. "You gave me a life worth living, Quincy Irving. You gave me love and respect and partnership. You gave me reasons to stay, and I have never once wished I had left instead." "Good," he said, pulling her close, "because I plan to keep giving you reasons to stay for as long as we both shall live." And he did, faithful to that promise until his last breath many years later, surrounded by family in the house they had built together. Georgia mourned him deeply, as one mourns the loss of half one's soul, but she also celebrated the life they had shared. She had lived to see her children thrive, her grandchildren grow, and even her great-grandchildren born into the legacy she and Quincy had created. When her own time came, peaceful in her sleep at the age of 81, Georgia's last thoughts were of that morning in Skidoo when she had packed her bag and prepared to leave at sunrise. She thought of the cowboy who had given her reasons to stay with every word, who had shown her what love and partnership could be, who had built a life with her that exceeded every dream she had ever dared to imagine. She had chosen to stay, and in staying, had found everything. The ranch endured, passed down through generations of Irvings who remembered the woman who had saved it with her intelligence and built it with her love. The cottage where Georgia had first lived was preserved as a reminder of where it all began, when a desperate woman and an honest man had found each other in the hard country of the Owens Valley and decided to build something beautiful together. In the end, the greatest legacy was not the land or the money, but the love story itself. The tale of how Georgia Vance had planned to leave at sunrise, and how Quincy Irving had given her one reason to stay with every word, until those reasons became a life together, a family, a love that endured through decades and beyond, into the memories of children and grandchildren who told the story with pride and wonder at how a simple conversation over coffee had changed everything, for all of them, forever.